There was a young guy who got an inheritance of several $1,000,000. And he had always wanted a convertible red sports car, a Ferrari Testarossa. He had seen one when he was a kid, always had wanted one. And so he went out and he bought one, and at the time they were $500,000. And so he buys this $500,000 Ferrari Testarossa, convertible, red, beautiful spring day. He's got the top down. He's driving through his town very slowly so everybody can see his new vehicle. And he pulls up next to a guy who looks like he's about 85 years old, and he's on a moped. You know, it's not even a real motorcycle. It's almost like just a gas-powered little scooter type deal. So he's on this moped, and the old guy's got his little helmet on, and he's sitting right next to the young guy that's in this Ferrari Testarossa. And the old guy looks over at him at this stoplight, and he says, "You know, son, that is one nice car you got there." He said, "When did you buy it?" And the young guy says, "Well, thanks for asking. Just bought it yesterday." He said, "Whoa, that thing is brand new, brand spanking new." He said, "You mind if I look into it?" And the young guy said, "No." And he had the top down. Of course, the older man was on a moped, so he just kickstand down. It was a stoplight, but a rather lengthy one. And so he got out and just kind of looked around, but he saw all the bells and whistles, and just thought it was an amazing looking vehicle. And so then he got back on his moped, and he yelled back over at the guy and said, "You know, if you don't mind, that's kind of a nosy question, but how much would a car like this cost?" The young guy said, "Oh, I don't mind asking. It cost me $500,000. Well, at that point, the old man he just said, almost exploded. He just said, $500,000? He said, "Why would anybody pay $500,000 for a vehicle?" The young guy said, "Well, this vehicle will go from 0 to 250 miles an hour in 6 seconds." Well, the old guy said, "No." He said, "I don't believe there's any vehicle in the world that will go from 0 to 250 miles an hour in 6 seconds. That is a lie." And right as he finished saying that, the light turned green. And so this young guy thought, "Well, I'm going to show this man that this will go 0 to 250 miles an hour in 6 seconds." So he floors it. His wheels spinning out, white smokes the guy, just leaves him, and it does 3 seconds later, he's going 150 miles an hour. And he's thinking, "I showed that guy." Well, he looks back and he sees this little speck in his rearview mirror. And it's getting closer and closer. Well, now it's 5 seconds, and he's going about 220 miles an hour. And all of a sudden, the guy on the moped blows by him at 225 miles an hour. Well, now he's up to 6 seconds. He's going 250 miles an hour. He looks, and the guy on the moped blows back by him. He's thinking, "What in the world kind of moped is that guy coming?" He looks in his rearview mirror, and here comes the older guy again. But this time he's going, looks like 300 miles an hour. Slams into his backbone. Well, the guy thinks he's killed him. So he stops, he gets out. Thankfully, almost miraculously, the older gentleman is not hurt. So he goes back there and he says, "Man, are you all right?" Oh, God, he's kind of shaken up a little bit, as you can imagine. But he says, yeah, I'm all right. I think I'll make it. The young guy says, "Is there anything I can do for you?" He said, yeah, there is something you can do for me. If you just unhook my suspenders from your rear view mirror. Well, sometimes stuff gets hooked to things and it gets drugged around a little bit. We're going to be talking about one of, in my opinion, the most fun, most exciting aspects of creation, and that is the idea of a dinosaur. Just thinking of dinosaurs, just putting out some dinosaur names like the Tyrannosaurus Rex, which is a name which means the king tyrant lizard that stood 20 feet tall at its hips and had a 5.5-foot skull that was filled with 60 serrated steak knife-like teeth that they say could bite off a single chunk of meat that weighed 500 pounds in a single bite. That's a whole row of us, really, at once, that a Tyrannosaurus Rex could bite off in one bite. And then you look at some of those huge plant-eating dinosaurs that had legs that looked like massive tree trunks, Argentinosaurs, that if you were anywhere close to them, when they walked, you would feel the ground shake like it was an earthquake. Or then some of those very much smaller dinosaurs. Some of them were smaller than a chicken. Coelophysis, or another little standing lizard that would run around, and they're exciting. The Pachycephalosaurus, I always love the Pachycephalosaurus because it's got such a long jaw-breaking name, and its name means the hard-headed lizard. It had a big dome on its head that the researchers think it did something probably like a deer would do, bucks, that when they fight and they use their antlers as weapons against each other, the Pachycephalosaurus probably ran at the opposing male, and something like a bighorn sheep or something of that nature. And so you look at these hard-headed lizards, or the Stegosaurus, the plated dinosaur like our friend Barry has right here with us this morning. So many different, amazing, unique kinds of huge lizards. And you ask the question, well, when did we start learning about a Stegosaurus or a Pachycephalosaurus or anything like that? Well, in basically the early 1800s, the people that started finding these particular bones, in 1822, there was a man by the name of Gideon Mantell. He was in Sussex, England. He was a doctor, and at that time they did house call. And he was out on a house call, and he was visiting one of his patients. And his wife knew that he collected fossils, things in rocks that looked like things that once lived. And so she was out walking down the road. Now, back then, of course, they didn't have paving crews like we have. And so the way that they would fix a pothole was they would go to a nearby rock quarry, and they'd have a big pile of rocks, and they would place it right beside the road. And then when a hole arose in the road, then whoever was near that area of the road would just take those rocks and put them in. And so she was walking. She saw the big pile of rock, and she looked down and saw something in it, a fossil of some sort. So she took it back to her husband, and her husband looked at it and thought, this is amazing. I've never seen anything like this. Wondered what it is. And so they started taking it to anatomists, people who studied animals. Well, it was so big that several of them said it's got to be some kind of elephant or some kind of rhinoceros. But the problem that Dr. Gideon Mantell had was it didn't look like an elephant or a rhinoceros. In fact, as he looked at it, it had nothing that resembled an elephant or a rhinoceros tooth at all, but it looked very much like an iguana tooth. Except it was about 20 times bigger than an iguana tooth. So whatever creature had it had a mouth that was shaped like an iguana, but 20 times bigger than any iguana that anybody had ever seen. And so that's what they decided to name it. Iguanodon, which meant iguana tooth. Like when you go to the orthodontist, that word don there in the middle, D-O-N, just means tooth. Lots of times as you're listening, if you hear anything about the word don, D-O-N, in a dinosaur name, it means something like tooth. So iguanodon meant iguana tooth. They said, we don't know what this creature looked like, but we know he had a tooth that looked like an iguana. So they named him iguana. No. Now, they did all kinds of wrong things as they later found more bones of this iguanodon. They found a big, what they thought was a horn, and they stuck it right on its nose. And they shaped it out like a rhinoceros with this big horn on its nose, and then later they uncovered several more iguanodons, and they realized that horn was not a horn at all, but it was a thumbnail that went right on the creature's front, right, and left claw, and they had put the horn in the wrong place. Well, as they started uncovering more of these dinosaur fossils, there wasn't a word for these creatures. In fact, they didn't know what to call them. Big, well, it's a lizard, but it's a very new lizard we've ever seen. So by 1841, there's a British anatomist named Sir Richard Owen, and between 1841 and 1842, he had found and looked at and seen so many of these big bones of what looks like huge reptiles. He said, we've got to have a word for this group of creatures. And he invented the word dinosaur in English in 1841, 1842. And it means terribly great or fearfully great lizard. Now, since that time, you can see the amazing, imaginative work that the dinosaurs have done in the minds of young people and old alike. I mean, I think we're on Jurassic Park number 38, and now, I think we've moved to Jurassic Galaxy, I think is what we've got going. And, if you do some research on dinosaurs, what you'll find is, lots of times if you go into a library, there's not a whole lion section. In fact, there's not even a whole mammal section. Lots of times there won't even be a whole bird section in the library, but you will go and there will be a massive section of books, and literally scores and scores of different books, and they're all talking to you about dinosaurs because they're fascinating. They're remarkable. Creatures that we envision from the bones that we see, but we in modern times have never actually seen one. Well, our best-selling book that we have at Apologetics Press is called Dinosaurs Unleashed, written by Eric Lyons himself. Why do you think this is the best-selling book that we have? Because the authors are so insightful, and the text is so riveting, and we are such good. Or because there's a Tyrannosaurus Rex on the front of the cover. I would say the latter is probably more of a reason why we've sold more dinosaur books than any book we've put out today. Because you put a dinosaur in something, people want to see it. I've got a picture that I have of a dinosaur Ritz cracker. Well, they decided they were going to sell Ritz crackers in the shape of a dinosaur. Now, why would you sell Ritz crackers in the shape of a dinosaur? Well, a little kid goes to the grocery store and he sees a regular old boring round cracker or a Tyrannosaurus Rex shaped cracker. Now, which one is he going to go for? Well, he's going for the Tyrannosaurus Rex shape. I mean, just think you get to munch on a Tyrannosaurus Rex instead of just a little round cracker. That's exciting. It is exciting, but there's the catch. And let me tell you the catch. We get all kinds of information, emails, letters, etc., from people all over the world about the things that we deal with. And one young mother wrote us, and she said, I have 2 children, and they are 15, I think she said 13, and she said, one of them is losing his faith. And that's not uncommon for us to hear. But she said, and dinosaurs were the start of his faith loss. But why? Why would dinosaurs have anything to do with a person losing their faith? What's the problem? Well, the problem is dinosaurs are so fascinating that everybody wants to talk about them. Anybody under the age of 82 is fairly fascinated by dinosaurs, actually, under the age of 98 or whatever. I haven't met a person yet who does not wonder about and think about and is not curious about dinosaurs regardless of age. And what happens when we start looking at the way dinosaurs are presented, it's kind of like that poor old man that's being drugged behind the Ferrari Testarossa. They've been chained to something. And what they've been chained to, what they've been hooked to, is the idea of billions of years and multi-million year evolution. Basically what we're told. Well, let's see what we're told. This is a Magic School Bus. Just a page out of a Magic School Bus book. Now, Magic School Bus is a cartoon and book series that is put out by public broadcasting, PBS. And what that just means is you pay taxes, the government says, well, what should we use your tax money to do as far as educating our young people? Well, we will use it to put out Magic School Bus. And Magic School Bus here is talking to you about this BC Boy comic strip. And you see right here, this little guy is carrying a club, and who does he represent? Supposed to be representing? Well, of course, he's a little caveman, and this is a dinosaur. But this young man who's riding the bus, as this kind-looking bus driver peers back at the scene, says, well, this story is make-believe. Well, why does he say this is make-believe? And this guy right here says, there were no dinosaurs during the time of cave people. Now, at first, it seems very innocent, harmless. Okay, you got the dinosaurs and the cave people, and they're running around. But this one very intelligent young man is explaining that that's not really the case. Well, why isn't that the case? So Florrie goes to explain to us as she draws these little cave people holding clubs and looking very unintelligent and imbecilic. No people ever saw a dinosaur by Florrie. When early humans appeared on Earth, dinosaurs had already been dead for millions of years. People found out about dinosaurs from their fossils. Now, you sitting in the pew this morning understand the idea about people finding out about dinosaurs because of their fossils, because that's how you found out about dinosaurs, because of their fossils. But that's also how you found out about dodo birds, or at least from the writing of people that did, because you've never seen one, and you've never seen a woolly mammoth, you've never seen a saber-toothed tiger, and you found out about them because of, well, not because you saw one, but because people in the past saw one, or you found some fossils or something like that. But here's the problem. Just because that's how you found out about dinosaurs that's how everyone found out about dinosaurs. You see, here's the situation that's being presented to you in Magic School Bus, and virtually 99.999% of every book on dinosaurs ever is following the evolutionary line of teaching, and that just simply means this. They're suggesting that dinosaurs evolved from lower animals, and that humans did not evolve until tens of millions of years after dinosaurs. And so the situation goes that dinosaurs supposedly started evolving in about 250 million years ago. They ruled the planet. They were the major force on planet Earth for about, you're looking at almost 200 million years. And then they died out about 65 million years ago when a huge asteroid hit the planet Earth and caused fires and things to happen all over the Earth. And so humans supposedly didn't come along until about 2 million years ago. Depends on what you're going to point your finger at and call the first human. But humans supposedly didn't evolve until about 2 million years ago. And so dinosaurs and humans are supposed to be separated by 60 million years. Well, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that's not what the Bible says. And what I'm going to show you is that's not what history bears out, and that's not what the evidence from dinosaur fossils even says, because two problems with that. Number one, dinosaurs didn't evolve from or into anything else. There's a basic law of biology called the law of biogenesis, and the law of biogenesis says things come from previously existing things of their own kind. Peach trees always have a peach seed. Dogs always give birth to puppies. Cats always give birth to kittens. Dinosaurs always give birth to baby dinosaurs. It's fundamental. It's the most fundamental law of biology that there is, that things reproduce according to their own kind. Dinosaurs didn't evolve into birds. They didn't evolve from birds. They didn't evolve into anything. They didn't evolve from anything. And just incidentally, neither did humans. And as you look at the true story of our history, well, what we find out is that dinosaurs were created. When? At the exact same time as humans were created. And so we're going to explore the evidence of this as we ask the simple question, what would it accomplish if we could show that humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time? This is a quote from a book by Dr. Philip Kitcher. He wrote a book titled Abusing Science, The Case Against Creationism. And Dr. Stephen Jay Gould said it was a brilliant book, but in this book he claimed that if you could find evidence that would put humans and dinosaurs together, that proved that they lived at the exact same time, then you would shake the foundations of evolutionary history. Now, I want you to see the little play on the screen right there. Now, if this special effect doesn't excite you, because this is the best I have right here today. It just goes downhill from here. So we are going to do what to the foundation of evolutionary history? Shake the foundation of evolutionary history. And look why it says that. Because of course, the dinosaurs are supposed to have been long extinct by the time that humans came along. So basically he said, look, we as evolutionists have pinned so much on our discussion of dinosaurs that if you could just show that dinosaurs and humans live together, well, that would shake not the branches of evolution, not the side aspects of evolution, but we're talking about shaking the foundations of evolutionary history. This is why a 15-year-old could lose his faith over dinosaurs. Now, you might not think it's that big of a deal, but when you buy into dinosaurs, you buy into the idea that humans evolved from non-human animals. You buy into the idea that there are billions and billions of years of time. You buy into the idea that the entire system was a cosmic accident and certain things come up and rain on the planet for millions of years and then they lose their time and then something else comes up, and you buy into an entire system of basically atheistic teaching that says humans are not special. They're just the latest product in a blind chance process of millions and millions of years. And so that's what we're going to try to do this afternoon, this morning. We're going to look at that idea of shaking the foundation of evolutionary history. So the first question would be, what does the Bible say about dinosaurs? It's a good question. If I were to say to you guys, okay guys, Let's get your Bibles out this morning, and please turn in your Bibles to the section that discusses dinosaurs. I'll wait, we got plenty of time. You just turn to the page that says dinosaurs. And you would say, okay, I don't know of a passage in the Bible that talks about dinosaurs directly. Okay, well turn in the Bible to the section that talks about woolly mammoths. Saying, I don't know about one of those. Okay, well turn the Bible to the section that talks about kangaroos. What about the section that talks about kangaroos? What about the section that talks about giant three-toed sloths? The section that talks about, we could list any number of animals or kinds of animals that if you were to say, I want to see in the Bible where it talks about this. Well, the idea somehow is we're kind of been told, well, if you don't find the word dinosaur in the Bible, then that just means the Bible doesn't talk about dinosaurs. Well, hold on just a second. But you know, there is the idea of something being discussed indirectly. You go to Exodus chapter 20, and you look at verse 11, for in 6 days the Lord made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that is in it. Okay, so how long did it take God to create everything? According to Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, 6 days. What did he leave out in that 6 days of creation? Anything? Okay, so according to this verse, in 6 days God created everything. Would that include woolly mammoths? Would it include saber-tooth tiger? Would it include chickens? Do you ever in your Bible one time read a sentence about a chicken? Never once. You don't, I mean, in all of that's remarkable to me too, because I love chicken. And it's great fried. And we, growing up, used to have a neighbor that had a big chicken coop, and you could go in, and me and my two brothers got chickens, and we named our favorite chickens, and we'd sit in the corner and pet our favorite chickens, and we'd come home, and our parents would ask us where we had been, and we would tell them we'd been sitting in the chicken coop petting our favorite chickens. And my parents were aghast at us sitting in the disgusting, filthy chicken coop, petting these chickens. What we did all the time. Not a word about chicken in the Bible. Does that mean God didn't make chickens? Not a word about any number of animals. So, what are we seeing here? If the Bible says God created everything in 6 days, would that include chickens? Would that include duck-billed platypus? Do you know I don't read one thing about a duck-billed platypus in the Bible, not one time. So all that is in them would include the duck-billed platypus, would include the chicken, and would include what? Dinosaurs. Now, here's what's interesting to me about this idea. When you go to the account of creation, it's very, very clear what happens. God, in the very beginning, creates the heavens and the earth, and on day one he creates light, day 2 the expanse, day 3 the flowers, the grass and trees, day 4 sun, moon, and stars, day 5 the birds and the fish, flying and swimming creatures, and day 6 he creates Adam and all land-living creatures. Now, as a Tyrannosaurus rex, a land-living creature. A Stegosaurus, a land-living creature. An Argentinosaurus, one of those huge plant-eating dinosaurs, a land-living creature. You see, we have no problem understanding that on day 6 God created hippopotamuses and elephants and rhinoceroses because we see those today, but they're just simply land-living creatures like every other land-living creature that was created on day 6. Now, here's what's interesting also to me. When he creates Adam, do you picture Adam as being imbecile and dumb and more grunting than talking and not being able to communicate what he wants to do or wants to say? No, you see God speaking to Adam in a way that clearly recognizes Adam as a very intelligent adult. And he gives Adam several jobs, and one of the jobs that he gives Adam is to name the creatures in the garden and in the creation. And so God proceeds to march in front of him all of the land-living creatures. And Adam names them, and the Bible says whatever Adam called them, that was what their name was. And I was talking about this one session, and I said, and Adam named all of the animals. And one of the younger kids in the session came up to me and said, you mean to tell me Adam named all the animals? I said, yeah, I named them all. And I think it was a little girl, she said, you mean to tell me he named this dog Fluffy and this dog Spot and this dog? And I said, okay, hold on. No, he didn't give each animal an individual name. He named all the kinds of names. And you can imagine how, like, if you were looking at deer. Now, our word for deer in English is D-E-E-R. And, it's one of those that you don't even put an S on, so we kind of deal oddly with the term deer that we use. But deer would probably have included antelope and elk and whitetail and mule deer and go down the list. And it's not like he named even one of those subcategories of them. He would just say, okay, these are deer, these are cattle, these are dinosaurs, big lizards, whatever language he was speaking. Maybe it was pre-Hebrew or whatever. We don't know the language Adam was speaking, but he would name the kinds of animals. And one of those kinds of animals would have been dinosaurs. So not only were Adam and Eve created on the exact same, in the same week as dinosaurs, but God brought dinosaurs before Adam and Eve, and he named their kind. And to deny that would mean you would have to say, well, God didn't bring the animals before Adam. Adam didn't name the animals. And Adam was some proto-human caveman-like being that wasn't intelligent enough. Well, when you start reading Genesis, you don't get a proto-human, some weird-looking, you get an intelligent human created in God's image from the very beginning. Adam and Eve both created in God's image. There's no upward movement from a lower animal to human. Adam and Eve are created completely human on day 6 of creation. It didn't take millions of years. They didn't come from lower mammals. They didn't evolve into or out of anything. They were created in human form on the 6th day. So if you were just to stop and say, does the Bible nail down exactly how humans got here? Yes. Was it evolution? No. Did dinosaurs evolve? No. Were dinosaurs and humans created on the same day of creation? Yes. Well, that's not all that we have, but you can stop there if you wanted to and say that's a good enough case. But then you go to Job. You start looking at the story of Job. Job is interesting to me. Job is kind of angry at his life situation. He doesn't feel like it's exactly fair. And he feels like he's been righteous and he's been following God for years. But for some reason, he's now experiencing terrible pain. And his friends come to him and say, Job, you know why you're experiencing pain. You're experiencing pain because you've done wrong. And they list all the wrong that he's done. You haven't taken care of widows, you've stolen from the poor, etc. And Job says, no, I haven't done all that stuff. You're lying. That's not true. I'm just as righteous now as I've always been, but somehow God's letting all this bad stuff happen to me. In fact, Job then says to God, basically, God, if you'll come down and talk to me, I think that you'll realize I've got a case. And if you'll just not kill me when you show up, because I know your presence would kill me. If you won't kill me when you show up and we can just talk, then I think that you'll see that I'm right about this. An interesting proposition, huh? Well, God says basically, okay, that's what we'll do. So God comes down to talk to Job in an unprecedented epiphany that you will hardly ever read anything like. And God starts asking Job some questions. Now, they're not questions that Job was ready to answer. In fact, the conversation doesn't go a thing like Job thought it would. Job thought he was going to say, well, I think this and you think that. That's not how it played out. God said, Job, where were you when I hung the world on nothing? Does Job know where he was? Job, can you feed all of the animals every single day? Job had lots of cattle and sheep and camels, and he knew what it took to get his few thousand fed every day. And to think about feeding all of them every day, Job realized there's no way he could possibly do it. Job, can you make an eagle fly? Well, God's asking Job questions that Job just simply is realizing, oh, God's much smarter than me. He understands how the world works much better than I do. And God never gives Job an answer. He just lists one question after another, about 50 of them, none of which Job has a legitimate answer to. Well, one of them is then, okay, Job, look at the behemoth that I made along with you. Now, I don't think there are any accidental words in the text of your Bible. Why do you think God says the behemoth that I made along with you? Because whatever creature this is going to be, God is telling Job, I made it at the same time as I made humans. And at the time Job was alive, which we think is probably the oldest book in the Old Testament, very soon, probably penned after the flood, that Job could look at this creature and see what God was talking about. So when you go to this word and you say the behemoth, well, the problem you got with the word behemoth is that, well, the problem that you got with behemoth is that it doesn't translate. And let me tell you what I mean by not translating. There's a difference between translating and transliterating something. When you translate something, you know the word and the creature in your language and you just call it that. So in Spanish, there's a word for dog. In Spanish, the word for dog is perro. Now, I don't know my R's very well, but it's P-E-R-R-O, I believe. And so in Spanish, the word is perro. In English, the word is dog. The two words don't sound a thing alike. But it's the same creature. So if you have a pet dog, if you were speaking Spanish, then you would say, I have a pet perro. Okay? Easy to understand, that's a translation. Well, what happens when you have something in your language that the other people don't have in their language? Well, what happens? Or they don't know that they have it. They don't know what the word means. Well, then you transliterate it. And that means you just take the sound from the original language and you put it in the new language that you're trying to go into. So if you guys were to read this in Hebrew, guess what the first sound of the word behemoth would look like to you? What would the second sound look like to you? What would the third sound look like to you? And the fourth sound would be th. In Hebrew, this sounds like behemoth. Okay, so you're reading it in Hebrew, you come to the Hebrew word, behemoth. You then go to English, and the English word is behemoth. You know why they can't translate the word behemoth. Because they don't know what it is. It's a word that was used to describe a huge creature that God was talking to Job about. But when you say, okay, what creature is it in English? Well, they don't know, and so they just put the word behemoth. That sounds like behemoth in Hebrew. They put it in English for you. Well, the translators then say, well, this is supposed to be an elephant or a hippopotamus. Now, let me ask you a question. What is the design of God's bringing the behemoth into the discussion? Okay, Joe, I'm trying to show you how powerful I am. And so God mentions a creature that is supposed to be the first of the ways of God, that is the most powerful land-living creature that exists in Job's time. Well, and the translator said, well, that's supposed to be an elephant or a hippopotamus. Now, you can understand why. Translators in 1901, this is the 1901 American Standard, you can understand why they would want to put the elephant or the hippopotamus. And here's simply why. What's the biggest land-living creature you got right now? An elephant. Okay, they'll weigh, what, 22,000 pounds or so, an adult African male elephant. Very big. It's the biggest thing we've got. And you guys know the size of an elephant's massive legs. You've probably seen them at zoos. It's the biggest land-living creature you got today, right now. Well, the problem is it's not the biggest land-living creature that's ever existed, just the biggest one you've got right now. And let's ask the simple question, does the description of behemoth match an elephant? Let's see. He eats grass like an ox. Okay, it's an herbivore. So yeah, that would match an elephant. His strength is in his hips, his power is in his stomach muscles, and he moves his tail like a cedar. Now, there are several aspects of this, and it also says he has bones that are like beams of bronze. And now we've done some research on the bones of huge plant-eating dinosaurs, and they're very thick and not porous, almost just exactly like beams of bronze, as opposed to elephants and hippopotamuses that have porous bones with holes in them. So there are some other aspects of this, but I don't think you need to go any further than this tail moving like a cedar. Because in the Bible, this was a very clear statement of size, of massive volume. You know, as you look at this, the righteous shall flourish like a palm tree. He shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon. Indeed, the Assyrian was a cedar of high stature, whose height was like the height of the cedars, of the highest branches of the high cedars. Now, around here, we don't have cedars like they had in the area where they would. Now, if you went out to California, you would see more of the types of cedars that would be the kinds of cedars of Lebanon. You're talking about massive 150 to 250 foot tall trees, the height of a 25-story building. Massive cedars that would, as you're looking at this, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 men around the base of this huge cedar, and if they connected hands, they wouldn't be able to even go around the whole trunk. You're talking about massive trees, not 40 or 50 feet tall. tall like we have around here. You're talking 250 feet tall or so with a huge diameter of a base of a trunk. Huge. And when God wanted to talk about how big something can get, how tall something can get, he would say like the height of a cedar, as big as a cedar. Okay, so let's apply that to the elephant and the hippo. Do they match the description of moving their tail like a cedar? Now that's it. Now there are some things in the world that have rather larger tails. But when you think about an elephant, its tail is one of the most diminutive aspects of its entire anatomy. I mean, of all the things on an elephant, would any person who ever saw an elephant say he moves his tail like a cedar? You just never would. Well, why would a translator say the behemoth had to be an elephant or a hippopotamus? Well, let's try a hippopotamus. Okay, hippopotamus is even worse. Its tail is designed to literally, when it's swimming in a river, to spread evenly refuse like fertilizer. That's what its tail is designed to do. It's not big at all. It's one of the smallest aspects of its anatomy. So why would a translator read behemoth who has a tail that swings like a cedar and say an elephant or hippopotamus? Well, that's the two biggest things you got right now. But is it the biggest creature that you've ever had? Well, no. Are there some creatures that you would literally look at them and think, that guy swings his tail like a huge tree? Sure there are. Would you look at a creature like the Brachiosaurus and see that its tail is larger than two hippopotamuses put together? And think about a huge tree like a cedar that it swings. Well, that makes perfect sense. It matches the description perfectly. So we have a creature whose description matches a humongous plant-eating dinosaur. That God comes to Job and says, Job, look at the biggest land-living creature basically in the world at the time. The translators of the 1901 say it's got to be an elephant or hippopotamus, and that doesn't make any sense at all because they don't swing their tails like a cedar. But we know a creature lived in the past that did. Why wouldn't a person say this looks like a dinosaur? Well, because if you've got evidence to put dinosaurs and humans together, that would shake the foundation of the evolutionary theory. And many of these very educated, scholarly translators have bought into the evolutionary idea. And so if they said Job probably saw something like a dinosaur, then that would mean humans and dinosaurs live together. And even though the description matches perfectly a huge plant-eating dinosaur, then you can't really say that because you'd be questioning the whole system of evolution. Well, what I'm here to say today, and what we'll look at even further this morning, is you can question the whole system of evolution, not only with dinosaurs, which you can do, and you can shake the foundation of evolutionary history, proving that, number one, the Bible says God created dinosaurs on the sixth day. Not only that, but it also mentions a creature, behemoth, that seems to match perfectly the description of a huge plant-eating dinosaur. Not only that, but we've got historical evidence that shows dinosaurs could be millions of years old, which we're going to go through. But furthermore, the idea of evolution is absurd. It doesn't match what we know biologically. It doesn't match what we know scientifically and repeatably. And so we are going to show that creation a few thousand years ago is a much more scientific, accurate description of what happened in this world. And you don't need evolution because evolution isn't true. It's not based on real facts. And shaking the foundation of that starts with the dinosaurs. So the next question is simply, okay, we look at what the Bible says about it, which you could basically say, okay, case closed. If you can prove the Bible's the inspired word of God, which we can, and you can prove that the Bible said dinosaurs were created on the sixth day of creation, which we can indirectly, then that's really all we need. But the question then will be, well, so if they really were created on the same day as humans, do we have any evidence that would put dinosaurs and humans in the same place and show they lived together at the same time? Well, we do, and we'll begin to look at it. Remember that the word dinosaur is an English invented word, invented in 1841. If you were to talk about these creatures before 1841 in a different language, what would you call them? Well, it just so happens that all across the world, in every single culture of every human, basically society and culture in the history of the world, there is a creature that is called a dragon that in the past was viewed as a very real creature. And what I mean by that is when we say the word dragon, what do you think? Oh, Aragorn and talking, fire breathing, magical beings that sit on a big pile of treasure and try not to let little hobbits steal their favorite stuff. That's what we think about when we think about a dragon. But when you look at the past, well, that's not what they discuss at all. In fact, a dragon would be right in the list of all of the other regular, ordinary creatures. So it would have, like, let's say, a natural history list. And it would say a dog does this, a deer does this, a dragon does this. Without missing a beat, we just put dragon right there with dog and deer and dragon. In the 13th century, we have a record of a dragon feeder that was paid by the emperor of China to feed the dragon. But when you start looking at that word dragon, it conjures up in our minds fire-breathing, flying, magical, gold, stealing creature. But in the ancient mind, that's not what it conjured up necessarily at all. Lots of times, they would say this dragon was 8 feet long, and it had scales that looked like this, etc. And so, you look at this word dragon, and Carl Sagan, a very staunch evolutionist himself, said the implacable mutual hostility between man and the dragon is not a Western anomaly, it's a worldwide phenomenon. People have been hunting dragons for years, they've been interacting with dragons for years. This is not something that is local to the United States or the Western world. Dragons are found in myths and legends and cultures all over the world. People all over the world believe in dragons. Well, what do you mean they believe in dragons? There's one creature remembered in the legends of almost every culture that's ever existed. A creature depicted with remarkable similarity by Chinese, Aztecs, even Inuits, Eskimos. You mean to tell me that the Eskimos describe a creature that is a huge lizard with scales and reptilian, exactly like the Aztecs and the Chinese do? Yes. Okay, well, why is that? Even they have stories of this animal, the dragon cultures from different continents, people who have no contact with one another, yet all of them have stories describing. Now, this says the same mythical creature. So you mean to tell me they all have stories about a big, scaly, lizard-like creature, but you're going to have to call it mythical because you can't say that they all saw one. Because if they did all see one, then now let me ask you a question. How do the Inuits describe it just like the Aztecs? They couldn't copy each other. They weren't swapping literature at the time. They didn't have cell phones. They didn't have internet. And yet somehow the Aztecs down in South America were describing these creatures exactly like the Chinese were? Well, as you start to look at this, here's one we found. They dug it up. You'll probably get a kick out of the name of this. This particular creature was named Dracorex hogwartsia. Did you notice the reference? Draco, dragon, Rex, king, Hogwartsia, from Hogwarts. Hogwarts, of course, being the name of the fantastical wizarding school in Harry Potter. They literally dug this dinosaur up and named it the King Dragon from Hogwarts. Why? Because it looks just like the ancient description of dragon. But what do you know it is? A dinosaur. So we have people in modern times who dig up a dinosaur and they name it the King Dragon Lizard. But then somehow they fail to connect that creature that lived, that we know existed, with the descriptions that match it perfectly in ancient history, and people call them dragons. Well, what's the problem? Well, I mean, if we say that Inuits actually saw one of these creatures that we just dug up and we've got the bones for them, we know existed, then that means our idea that dinosaurs lived 65 million years before humans would be wrong, and that would shape the foundations of evolutionary history, and we don't really want to do that. And so we're going to name this the King Dragon Lizard. We're going to show the similarity between this and dragon descriptions, but we're then going to say, but we know no human beings ever seen a live one of these. Why? Well, because humans didn't evolve till. No, because you said humans didn't evolve till millions of years after dinosaurs, but the history is showing us that, hold on, you've been wrong about it. As you continue, this Dragon King, Draco Rex, there's a placard underneath it there in the museum where it is. When we saw this creature's head, we weren't sure what kind of dinosaur it was. Its spiky horns, bumps, and long muzzle looked more like a dragon. Well, there's good reason it looked more like a dragon, because in ancient times, before the word dinosaur was invented, what did they call creatures that looked just like this when they saw them in the wood? Dragon. It's a new type of dinosaur that looks like a dragon. Oh, okay. Thank you. My point exactly. Well, as you then say to the evolutionary basic thinkers, okay, so you've got these descriptions all over the world of this lizard-like creature that look just like Draco Rex. Where did they get these ideas if they didn't see them? And the Inuits and the Aztecs and the Chinese all described them the same. They all had scales and they all were reptilian. Where did they get those ideas? Here's what they say. Earthly writing in How Reality Made Myth. He says of all the creatures that ever lived, pterosaurs probably most closely resemble the dragons of European legend. Reptilian, featherless, pterosaurs flew on wings. He said, okay, you've got these flying creatures that look very much like those reptilian dragons described. Well, where did he say they got these ideas? Notice this. This is almost comical. Add back to this comical for me. To people living in ancient times, a comet streaking through the skies with an icy tail millions of miles long would closely resemble a dragon. Okay, so the Inuits, the Aztecs, and the Chinese all looked at a comet, and they then described a reptilian creature with scales and claws and a pointed head. Okay, where do you get the pointed spiky head from a comet? I got it better. I think I have a better answer. They lived at the same time as these creatures did in the past, and they described exactly what they saw in the movies. Okay, now that makes sense. They all got the same description from a comet? Doesn't make a lick of sense. There you go. Which one of these looks more like a dragon? Well, you wouldn't need to go any farther than that. But you can. The idea that no human being has ever seen a live dinosaur. Well, this was written in a 1993 National Geographic article. And here's what I find interesting about it. Where do you put the information that you want to be the most memorable? If you're writing a paper at school, they tell you to put it in two places. At the very beginning and at the very end. Open in this article, the idea of no human being has ever seen a live dinosaur. Now here's what I'm going to tell you. The secular world will show your kids pictures of dinosaurs, will sell your kids dinosaur figurines, will do everything they can to get your kid interested in dinosaurs, but they do not care one lick whether your kid knows what a Tyrannosaurus Rex is. They don't care if they know what a Stegosaurus is. They don't care if they know what a Pachycephalosaurus is or a Parasaurolophus. They don't care anything about it. They want to get across one idea. And if they can get your child to grab onto this one idea, that's all they care about. And this is it. That no human being ever saw a live dinosaur. Now, ironically, if your child believes that, the story of creation is out the middle. Genesis chapters 1 through 6, gone. You think it might not be that profound, but it really is. And as you look through that, you can find the reasons why that just simply is not the case. Barry Kleins and I were out in Blanding, Utah, at the Natural Bridges National Monument. And what's interesting about the Natural Bridges National Monument is there were some Indians that used to live out there, the Anasazi Indians, and they used to carve things on the wall. They had a very unique way of carving things. They would take something like a little chisel that was more like just a sharp point, and they would make hundreds of tiny little holes in the wall, but it would be shaped in the form of a picture. And so there's a desert patina that basically covers these pictures so you can't fake them. And as you're looking at this, there are several of them that are on the walls. These are a little bit dim, but you can see the carving of a human figure right here. There's several others around here. And right here was the one that we went to see. As we went there, now you can tell this is several years ago, Eric's looking much younger than he is today. And that's what the carving looks like. No, we got up about 5 in the morning, area that was where you had to pay $5 to get into the park and things. And we were talking to the young lady at the time. She was probably 30, 35. We were probably in our mid to late 20s. And she said, "Where have you guys been?" We said, "Well, we were down at the Kachina Natural Bridge." She said, "Well, did you see the carving?" And I said, "Well, which one?" She said, "Well, the real weird one that looks like a dinosaur." We said, "Oh, yeah, we did see that." We said, "How do they explain it?" And talking about they being the evolutionists, how do they explain a carving that looks just like a dinosaur? Well, you have a man by the name of Frank Lawrence, who's an evolutionist, and here's what he said. There's a petroglyph in the Natural Bridges National Monument that bears a startling resemblance to a dinosaur, specifically a brontosaurus. A startling resemblance. Now let's look at that word startling for just a second. You know what the word startling means? You know, it means that you're kind of scared, that you have come across something that surprises you, and it takes you aback. You're not expecting it. And years ago, my mom says in passing and in humor that she raised 4 boys. I have 2 brothers and a dad. And she would run into stuff like this all the time in my growing up. Dad was at the cattle barn, and he decided, as he was cleaning out the feed room, that he would bring home a 6-foot-long black snake that he found in the feed room to us boys that we could use and have as a pet for a few days. And so I remember it well. He brought it home. The snake was much longer than I was at the time, and I thought, oh, this is amazing. And so we would let it, wrap around our arms and things. Now, of course, my mom didn't want any part of that, and she would let my dad and me and my 2 brothers mess with that kind of stuff. And she wouldn't make it where it wasn't, hey, you can't bring this stuff around the house, but it was, I don't want any part of it, and make sure you take care of it. That kind of thing. Well, we found an old aquarium that didn't have any water in it. We put our 6-foot-long black snake in there, and we put a rock on top of the little lid, and we thought, all right, this will be fine. Well, we had a little room that was kind of it was a screened-in porch-like place, and that's where we put it. We weren't allowed, I don't think, to bring this particular snake inside the house. It was in the screened-in porch, and the next morning we got up, looked at the aquarium, no snake. And we thought, okay, well, I guess it got out. And there was this little place kind of under the screen that looked like it could have squeezed out, and we thought, I guess it just squeezed out. 3 days later, or so, my mom goes into her closet to get a pair of shoes. Now, I don't know why that's surprising to any of you. You go into your closet to get shoes all of the time, I'm sure. And so that doesn't seem like that big a deal until you realize that when she went to get her favorite pair of shoes, she found a 6-foot-long black snake, right? So what do you think she was when she found a 6-foot-long black snake in her closet? Well, she was slightly startled. Wouldn't you say? Why? Because you don't look for a pair of shoes and you find a 6-foot-long black snake. I mean, it's just something you're not expecting. You don't look there for that thing. Now, why would an evolutionist like Frank Lawrence say that a pictograph that looks like a dinosaur is startling? You don't expect it. Well, why don't you expect it? Well, these Dinosaurs Indians lived hundreds and hundreds of years before we ever started digging up fossils of dinosaurs. And when we first started digging up fossils, we didn't even build them right. We built them with their thumb spike on their nose. We didn't know what they looked like. And so these Indians seem to have carved a picture of a dinosaur, but if they did that, then that would mean they saw one, and if no human beings ever seen a dinosaur according to the evolutionary system, then this just wouldn't fit. This would be startling. This would be something that just doesn't have an explanation. Now, to a creationist, will this be startling? Not startling at all. You understand exactly what's going on. God made dinosaurs on day 6, like He made all the other living creatures. Humans and dinosaurs lived together for hundreds and thousands of years, and then eventually they went extinct like so many other animals. But this makes perfect sense in the creation model. It doesn't make any sense at all in the evolutionary model. None whatsoever. And so, as you're looking at this idea, the concept that no human beings ever seen a live dinosaur, well, that's just not true. That is just wrong. You've got a temple series that was built by a man named Martin VII for his mother. I don't know what you get your mother for Mother's Day. This man thought that his mother was such a great mother, he needed to build a series of temples for her. When we were growing up, Mom had a thimble collection, and on Mother's Day we'd get her a thimble. it's a little bit bigger than a thimble. And so he creates this huge temple system. And if you've ever seen some of the Indiana Jones movies, you can see where some of those might have been filmed. This Cambodian temple in the middle of a jungle where the trees are starting to take over, but the temple is still visible. Well, on the sides of these, and especially this one particular, is a huge column. And there's about 40 feet of rock above this particular column, and there are some carvings, and one of them looks just like that. Well, as you compare that to maybe some kind of dinosaur that had plates on its back, what's interesting is when we first found the Stegosaurus, we thought the plates were flat. And so they first drew Stegosauruses with an armored back, kind of like plates or scales. And then later, as they found other Stegosauruses, they realized none of those plates weren't flat, they stuck up. And so we've got a carving from what we know to be 1187 AD, and it looks very similar to a Stegosaurus with the plates positioned correctly on its back. Now, if you are an evolutionist and you come to this picture, you have to say one of two things. Number one, it's fake. Well, you can't say it's fake because the same little white stuff that's inside of it called patina is inside of all the other carvings on these temples, and you can't say it's fake because it's not. It's obviously matching all the rest of the decor on the temple. Then you have to say, well, it doesn't look like a dinosaur. Okay, well, what does that look like to you? One of the very serious responses we got was, well, it's a wild pig with bushes behind it. Those would be pretty well manicured bushes, I would think. And I've never seen a wild pig's tail that looked that long. In fact, so long that it looks like it would, if it had room in this particular circular decor, would be going outside of the circle. Looks like a wild pig with bushes behind it. Why wouldn't you say it looks like some kind of dinosaur, like a Stegosaurus? Well, if you say that, then that means the people in 1187 knew more about dinosaur anatomy than we did. Yeah, they did. You know why? Because looking at one and then carving it is a whole lot easier than digging up the bones and putting it back together lots of times. Now, we have global communication. We've been digging up dinosaurs for years, and we can talk to the people in China who dig up a sample, and the people in Utah who dig up a sample, and the people in Canada who dig up a sample. There's no possible way they can do anything like that. Well, how do they get the carvings right all the time? Well, here's what's very interesting to me as we're going through the historical ideas. We've been told that dinosaur fossils are at least 65 million years old. And so they have this huge femur of a Tyrannosaurus rex, big leg, the biggest leg bone that's on a T-Rex. And they were moving it and they broke it in half. Tragic. Oh, they did break it in half. They started looking and they said, hold on just a second, it looks like this isn't fossilized. Now, a fossil is a rock in the shape of something that once lived. It's not the stuff. I have a fossilized coprolite. You know what a coprolite is? Most people don't. But it's dinosaur manure, fossilized. And so you have a pile of dinosaur manure that has been fossilized. And it's very interesting because you can learn a lot from a dinosaur about what they ate and things of that nature. But I'll take it to a classroom when I'm talking to kids about dinosaurs, and I'll say, you guys know what this is. It's a coprolite. And sometimes one of the kids will know what it is, and he'll look at it, and I'll say, do you want to touch it? Do you think a kid wants to touch fossilized dinosaur manure? Well, you know that I'm holding fossilized dinosaur manure. The reason I'm holding fossilized dinosaur manure is because it's not manure. It's a rock in the shape of dinosaur manure, but it's totally replaced by rock. Well, that's what a fossil is. It's all been totally replaced by rock. So they cracked this Tyrannosaurus rex femur open, and guess what? It was not totally replaced by rock. In fact, as Mary Schweitzer, the doctor who was looking at this, realized this is not fossilized at all. In fact, there's still soft tissue in here. So she started doing research on the tissue, and there is collagen that is so stretchy, you can grab it, pull it apart, let it go, it snaps back together. And there are aspects of red blood cells still in the dinosaur fossils that we uncover. And so she thought, number one, I think she did the test 5 times and didn't want to report the results. When you do a test 5 times and you find soft tissue in a Tyrannosaurus rex femur and you don't want to report the results? Well, if you've been told that every dinosaur fossil ever is at least 65 million years old, and you find collagen that is so stretchy it snaps back into place, that's going to call into question our dating methods there, isn't it? And so what's remarkable is that when they started looking at other dinosaur fossils, and they started bringing them over and getting to the center, they found tons of soft tissue. Scores of samples of soft tissue. Instead of saying we've been wrong about this millions of years process, here's what they said. We didn't know soft tissue would last 65 million years. Soft tissue doesn't last 65 million years. You mean you got collagen in the Tyrannosaurus rex femur that broke open, and there are aspects of red blood cells in it, and you still won't admit that that cannot be 65 million years old? Well, you see the problem with that. The problem is they have an idea that they're going to stick to it. It doesn't matter what information or evidence you present. They're going to continue to say, yeah, but so what? This is still the case. You've got the Bible that nails down the case that God created dinosaurs and humans on the same day. You've got the historical record that shows every nation in the world, basically from all of the beginning of history, describes a creature that matches dinosaurs perfectly, that they call a dragon. We dig a dinosaur up that matches a dragon description perfectly, and they say, well, it probably came from a comet instead of a creature like that. Making no sense whatsoever. And then you've got carvings and drawings of people that apparently knew more about dinosaur anatomy than we did, and that's because they saw them. And then you've got soft tissue in dinosaur bones. You know, what would we need? And the fact of the matter is, we found a fish that was supposed to date back to the time of dinosaurs and supposed to have been extinct at the exact same time as the dinosaurs. It was coelacanth fish. They said it lived 300 million years ago and died out 65 million years ago. Basically the equivalent of a dinosaur. And then in 1939, they found one on the coast of Madagascar. They kept on looking and they found hundreds and hundreds of them. And do you know what basically the community said? Oh, no, I guess it didn't go to anybody, we said. And did not miss a beat to continue to talk about all of the other creatures that they say prove evolution. You know what has happened to dinosaurs. They have been hijacked by the evolutionary community. But now let's ask the simple question, what were they designed to do? Why did God create dinosaurs? He did. On day 6. Why did he do it? To bring glory to him. When he was talking to Job and he pointed his spiritual finger at the behemoth and said, Job, look at this creature that I made with you. He swings his tail like a seagull. What was God's point? I'm bigger than the behemoth, and I created the behemoth, so when you look at the behemoth, you'll get a tiny, tiny idea of the power that I've got. And yet, for years, we as Christians have been avoiding talking about dinosaurs because we didn't know what to say. Because we were scared that it might lead to a discussion about evolution that we wouldn't know how to handle. And so we have let the evolutionists have dinosaurs for the last 6 decades. And I'll tell you, I think it's time we do. I think it's time we take them back. And we sit our children on our lap, and we open a book about dinosaurs, and we show them a Tyrannosaurus rex, or Argentinosaurus, or a Pachycephalosaurus, or a Stegosaurus, or a Parasaurus, and we say, isn't that an amazing creature? Now you think about a God that could create a creature like that, and that's the God who created you. And it's time we use them for what they were originally designed to be used for. And that's what we were originally designed to be used for, and that's to bring glory and honor to our Creator. Okay, that is going to be the end of our first session. Now here's what I like to do. After each session, sometimes it brings up questions in our minds. And so we'll take a very brief 5 to 10 minutes, maybe 11 and a half, however many that it takes to answer some questions. And we'll just have a question and answer session. Of course, there's just one rule for question and answer session. You only ask questions that I know the answer to, and that works pretty well. So, is there any question that you might have about anything we've discussed?
On the soft tissue, did they retain any samples for future studies, or were they basically used up in the original studies?
If I understand it right, there's plenty of soft tissue to get. So it's not as if there's a rarity of it. Lots of dinosaur shells, different, not like dinosaurs, Tyrannosaurus rex, but Stegosaurus and a Triceratops and stuff like that. So it's not hard to get now. The next question, really, most of the time people go to the Jurassic Park question. Okay, so could we get their DNA and find out how to replicate them in some type of, and the answer to that is DNA is one of the things that breaks down the very quickest. And so while you can get soft tissue and collagen and things like that, DNA molecule breaks down, and so there's just nothing that would be anything like, okay, we could replicate these. But there's plenty of soft tissue, as I understand. And the more they dig up dinosaur bones, the more they find. It's not rare. Barry, you have a question?
Yes. Is the soft tissue in every dinosaur?
Not in every dinosaur fossil, no. Some of them are actually fossilized. And what you're told lots of times about fossilization is it takes millions and millions of years or hundreds of thousands. Well, that's not true. You can fossilize something, and really, if you have the right situation, you got the right environment, right pressure, the right amount of silica running through something, you can fossilize something in 100 years. Or even, in months. You can take a petrified piece of wood. They figured out how you can take a petrified piece of wood, put it in the right conditions, and within a couple of months, petrify a piece of wood into a complete stone, where we were told for years that it took thousands or millions or tens of millions of years, and it just doesn't. So no, not all of them have soft tissue, but a whole lot of them do. Well, I say a whole lot. Some of them do. And it's not completely rare, and you can find soft tissue in a bunch of them, but a lot of them don't.
Let's talk about Noah's Ark. If the dinosaurs as big as they are historically, can you get two of them on the ark?
Well, that is a great question, and I'm glad you asked, because here's what happened. My lesson is actually about an hour and a half, but I stop it right there, so someone will then ask, okay, what about dinosaurs on the ark? And then I can act like I'm answering the question and really just go into the next aspect of this. But here's the short version of that. We're told that a huge meteorite slammed into the Yucatan Peninsula and caused worldwide fires that caused the atmosphere to get where the sun wouldn't shine in, and that's what caused the demise of the dinosaurs. But then there's a funny aspect to that, in that they said, well, but sharks were around the same time as dinosaurs, and they're still alive. Turtles were around the same time as dinosaurs, and they're still alive. Crocodiles were around the same time as dinosaurs, they're still alive. Okay, so why just the dinosaurs? You see, the fact of the matter is there's a much better explanation, and that is the flood of Noah. Well, when you start talking about the flood and you see the Amazonians carving pictures of dinosaurs after the flood, that means that the dinosaurs had to be on the ark, and then you look at an Argentinosaurus, and you think, okay, you're going to put two of those on the ark? And it looks like there were probably several different kinds of dinosaurs, as far as meat-eating dinosaurs and plant-eating dinosaurs. And so you can put two of each one of them. Well, here's the interesting aspect and answer, I think, to that. As you start looking at the explanation for where all the dinosaur fossil graveyards came from, in virtually every single explanation, this is the Dinosaur National Monument. This is a huge wall of hundreds and hundreds, 1,600 dinosaur fossils. Well, where do they say these fossils came from? Here's what they say. After a seasonal flood, when you start looking up where all these dinosaur graveyards came from, a seasonal flood, a regional flood, a flash flood, a local flood, a flood. Because a flood is what you need to get the right conditions to fossilize stuff. Okay, so that takes us to Noah's Ark. That would be the perfect explanation for all these dinosaur graveyard bones all over the world. But then how do you get those dinosaurs that lived through the flood on the ark? I was reading a news story the other day about a 20-foot long alligator in the Philippines. He weighed 2,400 pounds, and he was 24 feet. He weighed 2,000 pounds, he was 24 feet long. So that's 8 big steps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So from there to here, this particular, I think it was a crocodile. This particular crocodile, what? How big is a 24-foot, 2,000-pound crocodile skull? You ever seen one? You ever gone to Florida and seen an alligator or a crocodile hatches from an egg about that? Starts about 6 to 8 inches. You know the biggest dinosaur egg we've ever found is 24 inches long. of the biggest dinosaur we've ever seen, the egg is 24 inches long. So did you read that God said, no, I'm going to bring to you two of the biggest of every kind I can eat? Well, what would make perfect sense? If God brings a young pair of dinosaurs to Noah. Now the text says that God told Noah exactly the dimensions of the ark he wanted him to build it, and he brought two of all the kinds of creatures, and they were unclean animals, so there only would have been two for each kind of dinosaur. And if the biggest egg we've ever found is 24 inches long, wouldn't it make sense? It would save on food storage, save on room for those particular creatures to bring juvenile dinosaurs to Noah. And then when they got off the ark, they would be having a longer life than an older one would. And as you look at how big stuff gets, the older those reptiles grow, the bigger and bigger and bigger they get. So hey, if you got one that's 5 months old, a year old, you bring one that's a month old, and at the end of the flood it's now 13 months old. Well, that would make the best sense, I think. And so I think the answer to that is simply that God brought juvenile dinosaurs to Noah for him to put on the ark. You know, I had always thought that myself. I mean, how can you get two, you get two big Tyrannosaurus rexes, and you can just see Ham going up to Shem. Hey, man, you're females today. I had trouble with them yesterday. And, well, put two little ones on there. And so I think that's the easy solution to that. And it makes perfect sense. Yes?
Well, and another aspect of it is we often think of these dinosaurs as all being meat eaters, but when did animals begin to eat meat? I know in the garden it speaks about all being vegetarians. Was that before or after the flood?
You know, I don't know. I can't speak to that. I don't have any real solid timeline for that. My suggestion is that when God created everything, He put in animal DNA the ability to adapt to meat eating later after creation. Now, when that occurred, and if it was after the flood, etc., I don't know, but they might, like you say, they might not have been meat eaters always. And now that sounds odd, but there are several examples of lions that are just predatory meat eaters, but that have transitioned to a completely plant diet and are vegetarians now. And so the idea that the DNA could have been there to adapt to meat eating later would be, I think, a legitimate answer to that.
What about Leviathans and Job? Has anybody thought about those as being the dinosaurs?
Yes, and there again, we have a whole section on that in our book that I just don't have time to deal with in this lesson. But, you know, what we're told is, well, that's just a fantastic idea of a creature that can blow smoke and fire out of its mouth. You know, it has the description that it leaves pointed marks in the mire. It's a massive water-dwelling creature, and when it swims, the deep boils like a pot. And so it does very much resemble a fire-breathing dragon of some type of marine creature. And so people look at that and say, well, he's got to be talking about a mythical creature. But then when you start thinking, well, no, there are actually animals that do some very interesting things. You know, if I were to say there's a creature that gets to be as long as I am tall and can produce 660 volts of electricity, and it lives in water, and when it shocks a horse, it can stun it or kill it, but it doesn't shock itself. Well, that doesn't make any sense to most of us, because we would think, no, there's no creature that can produce electricity that lives in water. But then we look at the electric eel, and it produces 6 times the electricity that you get out of a 110 volt electric outlet, but it has a special blubber around it that keeps it from electrocuting itself, but it can produce a shock in water that can kill a human. Well, that's a pretty remarkable creature. And so if you have ever seen a creature that actually produced electricity in water, and someone said, there's a creature that produces electricity in water, you would say, no, that's impossible. You can't get that. And yet we know they're real. And then, of course, you've got the bombardier wheel that shoots a 206-degree chemical mixture out of its back end, and like a gun, rapid fire motion, because it mixes these chemicals together. And we've got some dinosaurs that have these huge, big, hollow chambers in their heads that nobody knows what they're used for. Well, if you had a dinosaur that was eating Well, some of them are 10 times the size of an elephant. And an elephant eats 300 pounds of vegetation a day. If you got a dinosaur that's eating 3,000 pounds of vegetation every single day, the methane gas that would be produced from the decomposition of that, and it had a chamber that it could hold some of that methane gas and then somehow create a spark like a, like a electric eel or something like that, or even just get flint from the bottom of a lake or a stream and it gets lodged in his teeth and it can click them together and make a spark and shoot that out. Well, the idea of it seems weird to us because we've never seen it, but you really do ask the question, okay, how come the dragon legends of nations all over the world talk about a fire-breathing reptile? I mean, why is it a reptile? It's a fire-breathing reptile described very much like a dinosaur that would match Leviathan's description perfectly, and everybody's got one and they couldn't copy each other. Well, I think it makes perfect sense that the Leviathan is something like a water-living, fire-breathing reptile of some sort. Now, how that exactly looked, I don't know, but if you got an electric eel that can produce 600 volts of electricity, you can sure get a Leviathan that can bring some fire. Real good question. All right. Any other questions? Okay, we'll take a break. Take about what time is it?
10:18.
10:18. Okay, we'll come back about 10:30. Give us about 13 minutes, and we'll move forward with our session. Thank you for listening so much.